You've
a
never
fan.
seen it?
I'd never seen it before. This was my first
That's
watch.
crazy.
Emily was not so much into it, which I get it not being everybody's cup of tea. It's very Terrence Malick. I've seen a lot of his stuff, and it
I haven't seen too much of his stuff. I've seen this and Badlands, and I love Badlands. It's probably like one of my favorite movies. But yeah, Tree of Life is also quite good too. I like it a lot. There are things
it's
about it that I remember quite well.
yeah, it has this amazing ability to sort of capture moments in your mind. And it is idea, and this is something that's very important in Terrence Malick's work, which is this idea of memory and how we capture memory. He's always playing on memory, or at least in all the stuff that I've seen. And memory is a really interesting thing to play with in film because our memories are so similar to film. And so it's kind of manipulated and remanipulated. And he loves to do this thing where a lot of his films aren't told in any sort of order, and he doesn't give you any context for things. So you're just jumping in and out moments, especially with The Tree of Life, even more so than his other work. And his movies are work. They're not easy films. They're not just films you can turn on and scroll on your phone and watch. They are films that you have to be very
Mhm.
engaged and active. And it's an enjoyable experience. You love it, but it's not a film that you can just sit back and relax to. It's not a film you can watch after a long day of work. It really is a film that you have to dedicate yourself to because you have to figure out, wait a minute, who are these people? What's going
Yeah.
on? How is this scene related to that scene? But then at the same time, I would argue, especially with the Tree of Life, is you really just need to be in the moment. I think the thing that was getting to Emily and the reason she struggled with this movie is she's constantly asking herself, well, wait a minute, how does this scene relate to that scene? Well, what's going on here? Who's the dead brother? Who's this person? Who's that person? I'm like, no, 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 you just got to be in the moment because that's what Terrence Malick films are all about. It's just
Mhm.
being there and allowing the film to hit you and overwhelm you and just exist in these motions. And this is what I wrote in my review when we were in high school. I had a guitar teacher, Mr. Jasper. Did you ever have him for anything?
Not
No?
not for classes, but he did like marching band and shit like that.
Okay, yeah. He did a lot of music stuff and he taught a lot of music classes. And I remember in guitar one, which I had with Emily, my now wife for all of our listeners, he was at a party and they were playing Miles Davis. And this woman walks up to him and she says, I don't like Miles Davis. He's not any good. And he corrects her. He says, no, 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 no. We all have the opinions that we have, and we're allowed to have those opinions, and we should. You don't have to like Miles Davis, but you can't say that Miles Davis is bad because he is objectively good at what he does. And that's kind of how I feel about Terrence Malick, and particularly this film here. Because if you, if you look at the letterbox on this, it's kind of all over the place. And there's people who absolutely love The Tree of Life, and there's
Yeah, this has
people
been
who fucking hate this movie.
yeah, this has been a thing for I've noticed this for a long time.
I mean, I've
Back
seen
and forth.
tons of reviews before I ever watched it. There's it's just a very dividing film. Not a lot of people who are like, "Oh yeah, this is okay. This is in the middle of the road kind of film." It's either you love it or you hate it. And I would argue that you can hate this film, and I understand why you would hate this film. I understand why Emily doesn't like this film. There's a long scene with dinosaurs in it that perhaps
It
Harlan
rocks.
doesn't
I love that shit. I love it, man. Like that kind of thing is awesome. Why not do that?
Sure, why
You
not? I
know?
mean, I love it. It's great. It's wonderful. It's spiritual. It's a film that comes much more from a place of feeling and emotion than logic. And I think sometimes you need a film like that. I think these kind of movies do need to exist. And poetry of this kind, I would argue that Terrence Malick's work, he's more of a poet than he is a novelist.
I think with that shit, he's trying to say, we live on this earth, we live and die. You know, we fight with our parents, we do all these things. But look, isn't it crazy? We live on the earth where the dinosaurs are. You know, like I feel like he's trying to make kind of like a big statement, history and time. It's fucking nuts, man. We come from the ground, which is where like all the things came from. This grandiose statement, which obviously, again, people don't really identify it with it too much, but I identify with it. I think it's awesome because you might as well. Fuck it. You might as well go like go all out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is a part of film that is really just like poetry itself. It is a very overlooked and underloved part of writing. And there's a couple of poets that everyone knows, like your Walt Whitmans or your Edgar Allan Poes. But most of our poets out there, especially modern poets, are ignored or forgotten. And I would argue it's even worse in cinema because at least in literature, you have those people at every university or college. You have your niche. And not that Terrence Malick doesn't have people that love him. He has plenty of people who love his work. I mean, that's why he's still making
Yeah.
films and critics like the work that he does. But
That yeah, they love him.
I would argue that there's not nearly enough filmmakers out there willing to make poetry, that you don't have to make a narrative in the common sense, that you can make a film that is more spiritual than necessarily here's point A, here's point B, here's point C. I think that's fine, and I love those kind of movies, and there's a lot of great versions of those movies. But I think there needs to be a lot more films like the work of Terrence Malick, where the images are speaking for themselves. I mean, if you were to read the script to this film, the dialogue itself isn't necessary to the film. Almost all of it is told through images. Even when Brad
Yeah.
Pitt's talking to his kid, it's being told through a swing or the way that he
Mhm.
grabs him by the back of the neck. You get this sense of, oh, we know this relationship, even though we never have to talk about it. And that's what makes it so wonderful. That's what makes this film so spectacular is that it has epitomized the idea of showing, not telling. We don't need to tell you what's going on. We don't need to
Right.
tell you what year it is or where they are or any of these things because those don't matter. What matters are the relationships between the father and the mother and the son and a husband and a wife. And as long as you can grasp that, not even through the arguments themselves, not even through the dialogue, but through these different images that kind of bounce back through each other, this idea of the montage that goes back to the beginning of cinema itself, the idea that when you combine two images together, you create in the mind because the mind has to create this sense of continuation, no matter what those two images are you can create this really interesting effect. And I think Terrence Malick is playing with that in a way that not nearly enough filmmakers do. So I love Tree of Life. I thought it was a wonderful time. I'm glad I have it on Blu-ray because it's definitely a movie I'm going to watch a lot in the future.
You've
It's
never seen
also,
it before.
I don't know why.
That's crazy.
Especially because I've seen a lot of Terrence Malick stuff, so you would have thought that was him. But I
Oh.
think part of it is because Tree of Life, like a lot of Malick's work, is hard to find. His work is not easily found on streaming services. Up to this point, I was not able to find Tree of Life on anything until I bought it on Blu-ray. So I think that was a big part of it, and I'm glad that I own this and can watch it in the future because
His stuff isn't too uncommon in my experience. A lot of his movies are on Criterion, if I'm not mistaken. Not on the channel, on Blu-ray. But yeah, you make a good point too. I think of Badlands and Tree of Life, yeah, they don't use like a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of images, which I appreciate. He's really good.